Okay, so what I want to do is I want to argue that the '68 in Ireland was essentially an outcome of international events, something that was homegrown, or rather it was the confluence of a series of international currents that hit a very, very ossified society and fractured it. And there's a number of factors I want to list. And from my point of view, the most important one was the Prague Spring. Because the Prague Spring, the rising Czechoslovakia against the Russian occupation against the CP, but demanding socialism with a human face, made it possible for young people to be socialists without being discredited, which the CP had been by the Hungarian uprising, and without having to sign up to the stultifying practice of CP politics in reality. So that made possible quite a small new left, but there was a new left in Ireland as there was a new left in most European capitals. Then there was the Paris events, and the Paris events convinced us that, as Alan Trevine said earlier, it could happen in Europe. Europe wasn't too stultified, too dead, too repressed, too civilised to have a revolution. It was possible to have a revolution in Europe. It was possible for young people to start the organised revolution, and that gave young people generally and population, working people generally, quite a lot of confidence. Because in the sort of definite 50s, the idea that you could even protest was just out the window. It was something that you couldn't believe. And then there was Vietnam, and I think what we felt was that Vietnam was the Vietnamese were going to defeat the Americans, that the Third World struggles were going to defeat the Americans, that they were so closely linked to the solidarity movements in the West, and that there was this global tide of history running in the right direction. One thing I think which was more particular to the north of Ireland than other places was the black movement in America, because certainly there was a very, very strong identity between Catholic workers and the events in the Deep South. And although people say, maybe that's a bit strained, it wasn't that strained. It wasn't that strained. You had people living, in these one-room houses. There was one house built in Bogside in 10 years in the Catholic area. There was this very, very savage job discrimination, and there was, an absolute denial of civil rights and this widespread prejudice. So people felt that, and they felt, I would have said it replaced an earlier racism where, the black babies and looking down on black people. But when black people started to fight, they became a role model for how young people should fight in the north of Ireland. And lastly, there was a feminist movement, which is sort of like one of the democratic currents growing out of the January '68 movement. Although I would say it was actually the weakest of the movements and relatively small. Now this movement failed. I think that has to be said. I think that's one of the things I've come to say, is that the movement has failed. And it's important to say that, because a lot of people say, well, the movement hasn't failed, it's transformed, it's changed from this, that and the other thing. But I don't think any of that's true. You had this movement which involved these lots of people in a revolutionary project, and the revolutionary project was defeated. And it wasn't defeated all at once, it was defeated in stages. The first stage was, maybe I should say first, who defeated it? It was defeated by the mobilisation of the traditional leaderships, Labourism, CP, in Ireland nationalism as well. It was defeated by a fairly concentrated counter-attack by capital, and it was defeated by its own internal weaknesses, by its inability to come up with a programme that would have organised everyone and held them together. So the first thing was the counter-attack, and the counter-attack in Ireland, in the north anyway, centred around reform versus revolution. So, and one of the central elements of that would obviously be the Untitled demonstration, which my organisation organised, because the nationalists, the CP, what there was in the party, seized on the promise of unionism. If there was a truce, if we didn't frighten the horses, then everything would change. And we considered that nonsense, and tried to show it was nonsense, and we said we proved it was nonsense by just simply walking down the road. And at some stage, the forces of the state put on their plain clothes and got stuck into it, and convinced a lot of workers that it was nonsense. But the problem was that was, if you like, an exemplary action. It wasn't actually a political victory. So PD, who organised the Untitled demonstration, who were, if you like, the left of the civil rights movement, remained the minority current. And after Untitled there was this upsurge, but then the number of demonstrations were gradually scaled down, and the last civil rights demonstration, the second last one, was the Bloody Sunday March. But by that stage, the intent of the civil rights leadership was to get the movement off the streets as quickly as possible. Now, I think the other thing that has to be said is that, it's what I think, coming out of reflecting on this for this meeting, is democratic movements survived a lot longer, national liberation movements survived a lot longer than the working class movement, because they were, in a sense, they weren't so central to the workers. The workers movement retreated very quickly in Ireland, and in fact a very, very strong unionist culture became established in the working class movements. One of the outcomes of '68 was the establishment of ICTU, which was in one sense a reform, because ICTU, the Northern Ireland Committee of the Irish Trade Union Congress, and in one sense that was reform, because up to the civil rights movement, Stormont had refused to recognise the trade unions on the ground that they were a subversive Republican 32-county organisation. So they recognised the trade unions immediately after, but in order to incorporate them. And the trade unions then became a favourite method for killing off demonstrations, and especially for telling the workers that they were not to be involved in demonstrations, and they became the masters of the peace mantra, with everybody's equally to blame, it's all very sad, go home now. There's demonstration after demonstration of that nature. So the movements like the Provisionals, that essentially were National Liberation Movement, were to some extent autonomous from that, because they weren't so securely based in the working class. They had a working class base in terms of support. They weren't a working class movement, they were a revolutionary nationalist movement. And that relative autonomy enabled them to function far longer. But of course, if you hold a Marxist view of history, then the working class are the class who's going to defeat capitalism, and an armed struggle movement that doesn't have a firm control of the class itself, it doesn't organise the class, is bound to fail. And it did fail, and that failure, which in my view took place as early as the hunger strikes. The hunger strikes was the final hurrah of revolutionary nationalism. It gathered together everybody who'd been part of the movement from the very beginning. They all mobilised in the hunger strike to try and defeat the British, and they failed. Not only did they fail, in the process of carrying out that struggle, the Republican leadership forged links with the British and with Fianna Fáil that laid the groundwork for the final settlement. And that's why I think it's so important to say that the 68 was defeated, because there's 68 commemoration commissions being set up in Northern Ireland today, and basically they're arguing about who was responsible for the wonderful society we live in now, with the MPs leading us all to the promised land. So if that movement was defeated, what is there that remains? What is it that we can say, well, we can take this from? I think there's about three things. One is the primacy of politics. I joined a socialist movement and then joined the People's Democracy when it was formed. And inside the People's Democracy were all the currents of 68, all the international currents in this small movement of about 200 people. Some of them were anarchists, some of them were Marxists, some of them were Maoists, some of them were reformist nationalists, some of them were Republicans. And what there was a series of rows and debates and fights to sort out what we felt the right politics were. But every time we decided, and we had to decide, we couldn't keep going being all things to all people, we had to decide. But everyone decided it got slightly smaller. And the current that was emerging as the major current was, of course, the Republican current. But there are other things that survive, and I think I'll finish on this note. One is, again I pointed out conveniently today, it was actually a situation, people usually a theory Stalin said called worse means better. And the more the workers got thumped in the head, the more they were likely to rise up. But actually 68 shows that better means better. Because what was an offer to the people who were in the movement I joined was far better than they'd had before. I mean, I went to university, I was a working class kid from Fossil. I had a place in university and I was going to have a career and all that. And this was something that wasn't available to most people. And in France and in London, a lot of working class kids were coming in, and they were being told that this, they had entered the promised land. But they were also being told, by being given the education that their masters had been given, they were being told how to think. And when they thought, they said, no, there's actually a possibility of a better society than the society we live in. And we have the confidence, because we've been, to a certain extent, felt the boot left off us, we have the confidence to go out and demand that. So I think one of the major hopes is that youth don't remember the failures of the past, they don't remember the defeats. There's a big sign up in Twinbrook at the minute saying long live the Provost, and the local youth have written below it, long live who? Now that's apolitical. It doesn't mean that they're all turned into revolutionaries. They're not. There's complete chaos and confusion in Twinbrook. But what it means is they're no longer led by the people who 10 years ago were the leaders of the revolutionary movement that was going to decide things. That's just gone away. What's left is chaotic, confused, mixed up, but it calls out for a new movement, and I think that new movement will be political and will be Marxist. Anybody want to argue with it?